Hi guys, so today's video is going to be a review for Deadhouse Gates, which is the second book in the Malazan Book of the Fallen series by Steven Erikson. But I would actually say more so, it's going to be a little bit of a non-spoilery chat for both that book and the first one, Gardens of the Moon. I do have an entirely rather detailed non-spoiler review for the first one. I'll have it linked down below if you just want to hear about that one. I am not going to be spoiling anything though, so regardless, you can just chill here too. You don't have to watch that. When I do book reviews, I always aim to be as informative as possible to help you determine whether a book sounds like something you would like. I, of course, still let you know my thoughts on things, whether or not it was appealing to me, but I'm very understanding that books are subjective. So I often will recommend books in recommendations videos that I personally don't like or I can't stand because I know that it might still be very appealing to you. And so this is actually going to be, in a weird way, sort of like a taste test type of video where I'm going to be elaborating more on the things that I think would be very helpful to know so that you can figure out if Malazan is this journey you would like to embark upon. The best way that I can describe the story is it genuinely feels like you are reading about a real planet, a real world. It feels so fleshed out because Steven Erikson, I do think, has a gift for creating worlds. He thinks through so many things. He thinks through the history of the smallest of things, which is extremely impressive, and I couldn't care less about some of those things. That's the problem for me, is that if it's not particularly relevant to the characters or their motivations or whatever's going on with them, then I don't really care. To an extent, I would say it still sounded rather appealing to me to hear that, simply because I didn't know to what extent that Steven Erikson went into detail about various buildings and spots and mountains and things like that. I didn't know how detailed it was going to be. I didn't know how relevant it would be to the story and to the characters. But the idea of it feeling like a well fleshed out world, it felt like it has its own history, that did sound right up my alley. But I think the best indication of whether or not it's going to be for you, I tabbed this one section that I'm going to read off to all of you, and this illustrates better than I could ever as to how Steven Erikson goes about letting you know these sorts of details. It's quite a long passage. I apologize, there's a lot of fantastical names and whatnot in this passage, so I'm going to say tons of things wrong. But here we go. The holy city of Erliton was a city of white stone, rising from the harbor to surround and engulf a vast, flat-topped hill known as Genrob. It was believed that one of the world's first cities was buried within Genrob, and that in the compacted rubble waited the throne of the seven protectors, which legend held was not a throne at all, but a chamber housing a ring of seven raised dioceses, each sanctified by one of the ascendants who set out to found seven cities. Erliton was 1,000 years old, but Genrob, the ancient city, now a hill of crushed stone, was believed to be 9 times that. An early Falad of Erliton had begun extensive and ambitious building on the flat top of Genrob to honor the city buried beneath the streets. The quarries along the north coast were gutted, whole hillsides carved out, the 10-ton white blocks of marble dressed and transported by ship to Erliton's harbor, then pulled through the lower districts to the ramps leading to the hill's summit. Temples, estates, gardens, domes, towers, and the Falad's palace rose like the gems of a virgin crown on Genrob. 3 years after the last block had been nudged into place, the ancient buried city shrugged. Subterranean archways collapsed beneath the immense strains of Falad's crown. Walls folded, foundation stones slid sideways into streets packed solid with dust. Beneath the surface, the dust behaved like water, racing down streets and alleys into gaping doorways beneath floors, all unseen in the unrelieved darkness of Genrob. On the surface, on a bright dawn marking an anniversary of the Falad rule, the crown sagged, towers toppled, domes split in clouds of white marble dust, and the palace dropped unevenly, in some places no more than a few feet, in others over 20 arm spans down into the flowing rivers of dust. Observers in the lower city described the event. It was as if a giant invisible hand had reached down to the crown, closing to gather in every building, crushing them all while pushing down into the hill. The cloud of dust that rose turned the sun into a copper disk for days afterward. Over 30,000 people died that day, including the Falad himself, and of the 3,000 who dwelt and worked within the palace, but one survived, a young cook's helper who was convinced that the beaker he had dropped on the floor a moment before the earthquake was to blame for the entire catastrophe. Driven mad with guilt, he stabbed himself in the heart while standing in the lower city's Marica Round, his blood flowing down to drench the paving stones where Fiddler now stood. Fiddler is the character that we are following for that particular section, of which you have a lot of different points of view. And it took all of that to get to the character, and that is what I mean when I say it absolutely feels like a documentary. I feel like if you watch the History Channel, I just feel like I need like reenactments and actors who are pretending to be these people, and then I need this digitalized footage of a city with an earthquake. And you know what I'm talking about if you've watched the History Channel and you've seen those sorts of documentaries where they sort of reenact things. And then you have historians who are experts and they kind of cut to them and they talk about these sorts of things. That's what all that feels like. And I like that stuff. But in book form, I don't. In fictional book form. If I was reading about a real place, the appeal for me in reading about real events in history is that it was real. It's always really interesting to me because then if I want to know more about a certain person or if I want to know more about that place, I can go look up more information about it. I can Google stuff. I can tell someone else, like, did you know that this happened? And then in this, there's no other information to go look up. It didn't actually happen. So that little tidbit, I don't know what it is about my brain, but when it's real, it's interesting. And when it's fake, I mean, the whole passage was to let you know about the history, this story, about the spot that the character was standing on. And I always say, Steven Erikson can clearly write, and I think he has a background in anthropology, and I think that that's fairly evident. And when people talk about this series being dense, I feel like that's, again, an example of that, because you read it and you're like, I don't know this place, I don't know if this is relevant, but I guess I'll find out. And I think that that's part of what makes it dense. It's not like, he has great vocabulary, but it's not like I'm sitting there like, I don't know what's going on. It's not that it's confusing because it's so abstract. In fact, it's fairly straightforward, but it's formal and it's just very history-centered. I also feel that it's quite thematic. So I personally don't feel it's particularly character-driven. I feel often that the characters' motivations are masked and are meant to be revealed later so that the reveals are more impactful, and then you get to know, oh, actually this one god was controlling this person the whole time, and things like that. Things are revealed. Sometimes you're not even given characters' names, because later you kind of think, wait, that scene that happened earlier, was that this person? And somebody's relative will be mentioned, and then that person shows up in the second book. Things like that. So I think that the character motivations, which I often want to know so that I can be there with them and I can root for them or I can root against them, sometimes there's just like, hey, the characters will be like, where did so-and-so go? And someone's like, I don't know, they probably had their own business. And then you go to that character and they're like, I'm trying to bring on the end of the world. And you're like, why? What are you doing that for? And it's like, because I don't like the Empress. That's really not my taste at all. But other people, I think, love the mystery of it, the pieces that are broken apart and you're getting snippets of them, and I can clearly see that these pieces are being presented to you so that as the series progresses you can start to put them all together. I think that that element is really cool to an extent. I know that there are some literary books that are very intimate and they follow a single person and it's really abstract and beautiful and raw and things like that. But then there are literary works that are very thematic and they're more about the world and the consequences of things, and they show you these little snippets of things. I think if you like literary fiction that does that, then I think that this will be very appealing to you. However, I also feel that sometimes the characters and their internal monologues are sort of devices for exploration of things, which then makes the characters not feel particularly like real people to me. And I think this is especially true in this other part that I had tabbed. We follow this girl, and if I'm not mistaken, she's only 16 years old, and she has the most mature navel-gazing internal monologues I've ever come across. It says there's a character named Felicen, and that is the 16-year-old girl's thoughts that we are reading. She felt she was close to grasping a profound truth around which orbited all human endeavor since the very beginning of existence. And then these are her thoughts. We do not but scratch the world, frail and fraught. Every vast drama of civilizations, of peoples with their certainties and gestures, means nothing, affects nothing. Life crawls on, ever on. She wondered if the gift of revelation, of discovering the meaning underlying humanity, offered nothing more than a devastating sense of futility. Her thoughts again. It's the ignorant who find a cause and cling to it, for within that is the illusion of significance, faith, a king, queen, or emperor, or vengeance, all the bastions of fools. I definitely think that passage is very beautifully written, but again, that's a 16-year-old, but hopefully in reading those couple of passages, it makes it clearer for you to determine if this sounds like something that you want to get into. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Definitely let me know if you've not started the series, if you feel like this is going to make you want to read it, or if you don't want to read it now. But anyway, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.